In the current system, the K-12 system, kids are basically taught, get a good grade, get a diploma, get a degree, get a job, and you go through that. And in that system, they're doing what they think they're supposed to do. So it's not really building intrinsic motivation. It's sort of extrinsic in a really big way. Well, the purpose of an education should be to create value in the world. And if we start out, the reason you're doing this, we're going to talk about value creation. Now, all of a sudden, what they learn is really important, why they learn, how to learn, all those things. They're going to leave high school realizing that all of this is for me to connect the dots, to go out in the world and create more and more holistic value.
As I was reading The Value Creation Kid, and I was identifying, just things I had done in my own life with our kids. Our boys are 14 and 17. And there's some things we've done really well, like parenting. In most cases, we're very imperfect. And there's things that we've done that we could do better, and constantly learning from each other and learning from the individual personalities. You identify the child and the type, but it reminded me of I'll have to find the book. I'm not at home, so I wasn't able to go in my library like I normally could to find the actual book. But I read a book when they were really young, and it talked about building a financial system. And I've been in the financial services industry for 20 plus years. I've been an advisor. I've run a company. I have dealt with this subject for so long. So reading it was so enlightening and exciting to me, because it's so much of the stuff not only I've taught, but the things I learned. And we used a system where the kids did their most important things every day. And as they did those things, they would see some level of a reward or a result. And it was a positive thing. It wasn't an allowance. It wasn't financial. Then they were buying some of their own things. And so I want to talk more about your model, but it was just interesting because it reminded me of what I was searching for when I started to look for this. And you and Scott have created a book that really is a model, and it's updated and it's exciting. Talk to me about The Value Creation Kid and where it came from and what your goal is when it comes to this actual release.
Yeah, there's a lot there in that three-part question. One thing that's never felt right to me, it's super important, but it's never felt right just talking about the money aspect. And when I think about value creation, holistic value creation, it's material, which includes the money, things that are accumulated, but it's also emotional energy and spiritual. And the emotional energy part of it, I personally believe positive emotional energy is the scarcest commodity on the planet, because when that's running on 9 or 10, we can do anything. When it's running on 1 or 2, you get a flat tire and it runs your entire week. And then the spiritual side of it means something different to everyone. You could be deeply religious. You could just say, I'm spiritual, like a lot of people do. But for me, when I think about it, it's connectedness, maybe to something bigger, to the community. It's love. It's all those things that go in it. And everybody plays in all three buckets: material, emotional energy, and spiritual. So I think it's really important to think about value creation holistically. And when I hear a lot of the folks out there that are champions of financial literacy for kids, we keep expecting that when we put this stuff out there, that kids will connect the dots. And I find that adults don't connect dots very well. And it turns half the people off or more in the room when you only talk about the money. Oh, you're one of those, right? It's all important. We need material value creation so we can sustain the lifestyle we want. Every kid I've talked to, and I've spoken to thousands of high school seniors in small groups, and I ask the question, do you feel better about yourself, or do you think you will when you become an adult, if you're self-reliant or dependent on someone else? I can't even finish the sentence, and it's self-reliant. Like, they all want to be that. And so for parents, and this is something I almost never see, they don't work backwards from what they see their children launching into adulthood looking like. What would the characteristics be? They're self-reliant, they're financially competent, financially independent. If they choose to be, they can think critically, and they go into the world creating value, and they see that in a sort of a win-win way. They value family, building community, and all that, because you can sustain and grow that forever. So I always encourage parents to start with, what would the ideal launched high school graduating senior into adulthood look like? And then in the Gravy Stack book that we have here, Value Creation Kid, and the subtitle is really important: the healthy struggles that your children need to succeed. It gives you a roadmap to sort of build this environment, if you will. You could call it operationalizing value creation in the family, to step by step, walk them through becoming these amazing adults over time.
Yeah, I have been known to ask 3 and 4 part questions. So thank you for answering it with such consistency. I think that what you're talking about is so important because these individual children that I've seen grow up with their parents, and I've managed some of their parents' monies for years, and you see wealth and success and everything that these individuals did to get there, and their children are doing none of those things. And so in trying to give their children something better than what they grew up with, they missed the healthy struggle. Talk to our listeners a little bit about the value of struggle.
Yeah, and foundationally to what you're talking about, we think so many parents with the best of intentions, let's make it easier, let's make it better. They shouldn't have to go through what we went through. Well, I went through a lot of struggle and I turned out pretty good. Those that go through the most struggle, there's so many immigrant stories out there. They come over here and take over the world in the United States. I mean, it's so amazing what they're able to accomplish. So we take all the struggle away and it's like they never went to the life gym and they get launched. It's really important to have them go through those struggles. And at every age, a struggle can be different. A struggle could be just learning how to interact in the world when you go out to dinner or something along those lines, or getting your homework done and getting decent grades and like really learning so you can apply this stuff in a meaningful, value creating way. That can be a struggle. In the book, we have lots of examples and by different age groups of, these are things that the parents can be teaching the kids to kind of walk through these micro struggles to be able to do, any and all things in the household. So when they launch into adulthood, things are better for them as well. So struggle is important. Why do so many parents sort of freak out when they watch the kids struggle? They just can't handle it. So they immediately take it away.
Yeah.
It's painful, but if you see the value in struggle with the kids, then love is unconditional. I love you. You have to go through this. You need to have learn this capability, but I'm going to be okay letting you do that. So you can be a stronger teenager and eventually a much stronger adult.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's funny because the very struggles are part of what build us to have that resilience when we actually need to make the decisions that are required of us in these challenges. The challenging moments are the very moments that I feel the most purpose out of. You're like, okay, I made it through this as a child. And I grew up with not a whole lot. And so, my parents provided me great foundation, great love in the house. Financially, there was no conversation, nothing at all when it came to a financial discussion. And it was always hiding it a little bit. So we've tried dramatically to change that in our home and have conversations extremely open, extremely different. And I add substance. I talk about our employees. I talk about the challenge of leadership. I talk about how, there are months where I get phantom income and I pay taxes on it. And we talk about what that means. And, the older my children get, I feel like I'm preparing them to understand those things, but also they have to find the struggle on their own. And as a parent, it's really hard to watch them struggle. That's what you're hitting on right there. It's very difficult for us to actually evaluate and watch and go, oh my gosh, can we not just solve this problem for them?
Yeah. And some of the struggles, they act like, a lot of folks like it's trauma where it shouldn't be. There's a lot of cases that I've seen where children are struggling in school, people are bullying me, and next thing you know, they have a therapist, sometimes 2 therapists. They're on different anxiety drugs. It's like, wait a minute, this is a healthy struggle to be able to learn to socialize and fit out in the world. And there's going to be people that you don't get along with, those that don't agree with you. There's going to be jerks out there, et cetera. That's a healthy struggle, and you talk through it. And rather than, oh, you poor thing, and I hear adults doing it to each other all the time, better question is, how did you leverage that, or how do you plan to leverage that to create more value in the world? So, whether it's a healthy struggle by design, which is what we're trying to get at in the book, or, it happens, an unhealthy struggle, all struggles can be leveraged to create more value. And if you just look at Viktor Frankl and Man's Search for Meaning in that book,
favorite books, yeah.
Yeah, I read it at least once a year, and I get deeper understanding and meaning every single time. That was horrific trauma, struggle, terrible. And yet he's changed the lives and perspectives and mindset of tens of millions of people around the world. That's how he leveraged it. We all can do that regardless of what's going on. And we have it pretty easy on average here in the United States. And I didn't have the foundation when I grew up. I was kicked out of the house at the beginning of my senior year in high school. Younger brother in and out of prison 4 times before I chose to disown him for some of the things that he did. There were family members that were way worse than that. I mean, it was a toxic and dangerous environment a lot of the time. But what saved it for me, and I talk about this later in the book, I got my start pulling weeds for 25 cents an hour. A neighbor, unsolicited, not a friend, not a family member. Hey, would you do this for 25 cents an hour? Sure. And back then in the 60s, you could buy, 2 candy bars and have change. That was a big deal. And I remember it felt good. And then I'm shoveling snow and I'm mowing lawns and I have paper routes and, a dishwasher, busboy, and a cook. And by the time I was asked to leave the house, it was one night I slept in my truck, no big deal. Next night I had an apartment. It was a non-event financially because I was out in the real world trading my best efforts for the accumulated best efforts of others. And I could trust it. The more value that I created, the more they were willing to pay me for
Yep.
it. Again, it can't be friends or family because you don't know if it's real. They might just be being nice and helping you. It's got to be in the real world with real people. And I just kept taking bigger and bigger steps. And in the 1980s, I made most of my money playing music. I played over 1,000 nights in concerts, playing guitar, singing in different bands. And then after that, I'm on my 7th business I've started from scratch now with exits from a few million to well into 9 figures. And I just kept taking bigger steps on this value creation cycle. You struggle to get a capability, it builds confidence, use that to actually create value. And then if you choose to, take bigger and bigger steps. But if I look at the 3 buckets, there's material. Okay, I've done well there and I expect to continue to do well. The emotional energy bucket, I believe, is what I excel at over all 3 of them, like by far. I mean, think about leadership, right? That's what we do. We create an energizing environment to release productive, intrinsically motivated energy with the team members. So I think about it holistically. It's not just money, and everybody goes there. Think about it holistically. The emotional piece and the spiritual piece, arguably way more important as a set than just the material piece.
Yeah, well, I mean, when stuff gets heavy, when it gets really heavy and you can't find a solution, and I know someone that's built businesses and sold them and developed new ones, that there have been problems that you can't solve. And there are challenges with humans where someone gets sick and you can't help their family, or there are just moments in your life where having something bigger than yourself really does pay off. And to lean on that energy for me has been a lifesaver, because those are the moments where I'm like, oh my gosh, I usually can figure these things out and now I can't. The other thing that I heard in your answer that I love is that, you found a way to also do some of the things you love along the way. And I think this is important. I mean, you are an avid guitarist. You love music. When you can incorporate what you love and your career, even if they're in 2 separate buckets, but you're still doing it. For 20 years, I played soccer twice a week or more. And I lived to leave the job, the career, no matter what my role was, so I could go be one of the guys on the field and score soccer goals. Like that provided me with more energy and a release that was completely different than anything else. I'm sure it's the same when you're standing on the stage playing the guitar.
Yeah, it is a passion for sure. And one point that I think a lot about here, and I've always done this long before I could articulate it, is I would take my passion with me everywhere I went. So people will say, find your passion and go do that. And then as a result of that, a lot of people are just sitting back with their arms folded, waiting for the world to impress them with something worthy, for them to do.
Right.
Like, forget that. Take your passion with you everywhere. When I was mowing lawns, I was the best lawnmower ever. When I was washing dishes, cook, best they ever had. There was actually a competition in the Phoenix area in the club scene back in the 80s, like who's the best guitar player? And it was tied between me and one other guy. I didn't even start that, but it's like, okay. But I took it so serious. I played 6 hours a day minimum. to do that. So take your passion everywhere you go, even if it's not the thing that really resonates with you to your bones, because you're still interacting with people, and there's all of this emotional and spiritual energy value that you can actually create and participate in. And doing that's going to expose you to opportunities that you otherwise would never have. You just wouldn't have it.
Yeah. And anytime we give our best, we always feel better. So even if I'm the best dishwasher, I'm giving it my best. I'm walking away at the end of the day, the end of the night, feeling good. You talked about the 25 cent. I cut my neighbor's grass the first time. I will never forget it. My dad let me borrow his lawnmower. I went across the street. I was probably 10 years old. I cut, edged, swept. I mean, I think I spent 5 or 6 hours at this neighbor's house. I lived in a lower middle class neighborhood. It was a little rough street. And I made this yard look great. And they gave me $5 afterwards. And I remember thinking to myself, I was so grateful that I got the $5. And then I came back and I was like, I just did $5. I did way more than $5 worth of work. So I started to say to myself, okay, I have to evaluate the value I'm going to put in, but it didn't change the output. I did that role multiple times for $5 because it made me better. So when I got the next yard, I was able to execute upon it. And you really gave us that story over and over and over again, how it allowed you to build towards the next level. And I think listeners value that, because we forget that even the crappy things that we've done in our lives can really help lead to some substantial opportunities and successes.
Well, not only do we just feel better, we inspire and infect everybody around us with positive emotional energy. When I talk to kids about this and the language is resonating so well, it's just absolutely incredible. Some kids, they walk into a room, and if they're in the right mood, they lift the entire room. There's a superpower when it comes to emotional energy. And at the same time, because they have that superpower, they're not in a good mood, they can take the room all the way down as well. But if they're intentionally aware of that and leveraging it to create more value in the world, it's so cool to watch them change what they want to do for a living. I went from a lawyer in one case I'm thinking of, and now an event planner, and because it's more aligned with her value creation superpower. But no matter what, it's infectious. We bring it with us everywhere we go. And what you're talking about, it's like a perfect model for any business evaluating their price, because every business should have a pricing policy that's something like this, charge the highest possible price we can while being the best value alternative and encouraging future business. And with that, you're always playing with it. If you charge $1 more than you can, you'll never get work. If $1 or more or less, you're leaving something on the table, and we're pricing for the value that we're bringing in there. Well, we can think about it in all three buckets: material, emotional, and spiritual. Does that resonate?
It resonates really well, because I think the money becomes empty. I tell listeners all the time, it's not the first time I've said this, I feel like early in my career, because I came from less of the options that existed and I didn't really know the path, I was on the ground punching up at the world. I'm not opening my arms and giving of myself to the world. And when you do that, money just starts to follow. Money and opportunity start to follow. When you're the energy that you want in the room, you get that energy back. You are the energy you put out into the world, is what you're saying. And that is something that resonates clearly. But when you've attained money and you've now had the ability to have financial success, every single hurdle is empty. They're empty without the other parts of it. And that's where the other areas to me really resonate in what you're saying. And I think the listeners would agree. And what you're doing is you're building the whole human. If you're talking about children, you're not trying to just build them to be financially stable, because you're going to build financially stable, empty children. You need them to be financially literate, but do what they love. One of my favorite sayings is the founding fathers said, we are soldiers so our children can be teachers, so their children can be artists. And a lot of times the next generation after artists, Lee, need to be soldiers again, because they didn't earn enough in that artistry. But the truth is, if we can take a little bit of that last generation and teach it to our kids, and they can execute on what they want to do, then you're right. Being the event planner becomes really more valuable to the human that you were talking to versus the lawyer. And that's awesome. I mean, that's exactly what kids need to know.
Yeah, and I want them to go forth and be value creators in the world. And ideally do what you absolutely love, but until you do it, like we talked about, take your passion everywhere you go and it'll expose all these opportunities. And one way to think about it, for the listeners out there is that in the current system, the K-12 system, kids are basically taught, get a good grade, get a diploma, get a degree, get a job, and you go through that. And in that system, they're doing what they think they're supposed to do. So it's not really building intrinsic motivation. It's sort of extrinsic in a really big way. Well, the purpose of an education should be to create value in the world. And if we start out, imagine in kindergarten, hey, the reason you're doing this, we're going to talk about value creation. And with the book Value Creation Kid, we would love for parents to be talking about it long before they get to kindergarten, be exposed to that energy in the household around value creation. Now, all of a sudden, what they learn is really important, why they learn, how to learn, all those things, sort of marry up. And they're going to leave high school realizing that all of this is for me to connect the dots, to go out in the world and create more and more holistic value, not just the material side of it. So I think that's a big piece that's really missed. And you can tell that folks are more in the camp of, oh, how you look in the world instead of the value you create, when they say things like, and they've even said it to me, oh, you're an author, you have a couple of books, you must be so proud, or you went to this school and got this degree. That's so great. Isn't the better question, did the book move the needle? Did the degree allow me to create value in the world? But we act like the goal was to get the diploma or the degree or write the book.
Right.
And now with AI, everybody can write a book in about 3 minutes. Give it a title, I want 8 chapters and 40,000 words, and it'll just spit it out for you. And it used to be writing a book was, people took it serious. Like, I'm an author, I'm going to take it serious. I really want to get my message across, create value in the world. Now it's like a business card for most people in business. So there's a lot of books that are just an absolute waste out there. But it's about that. How are we moving the needle? With the podcast that you have, how are you helping the listeners create more value in their lives? If you write a book, how's that helping? If we get educated, how's that really, really helping? And the current system just isn't great. It's not great for the kids. And I talk about this all the time.
Yeah, it's really a challenge. It's interesting because I sent my kids to Catholic school because I went to Catholic school. And so when we started our family, my wife and I made the decision. I said, if I look back, there were a couple of core things that I think really impacted the way you and I are. And we love each other and we want to build a family around what we believe and who we are. And I know that in your book, you talk a little bit about, the last name meaning something, and Danner, Donnell, whatever it may be, Benson. What does that mean to our family? And there's been lots of conversations we've had in and around that. Sending them to Catholic school was one, and my wife's a K through 3 elementary public school teacher. We love to give back. I'm a board member of the Boys and Girls Club and have been for 15 years working with the public school system and the system that needs help. And but I look at that and I wanted to provide some different parameters. I wanted them to wear a uniform every day. I didn't want them to judge what somebody looked like or what they were wearing and want those things. I mean, we had a couple soccer jerseys and that was their outside wear. And so it simplifies life to the things that are most important. And we're watching some of it come to fruition. And it's interesting reading a book. This is the kind of book that I would have read like 13 times when they were under 5. Mm-hmm. And now having them as teenagers and reading it comes at it from a completely different perspective. It allows me to see it in a way where, okay, these are some of the things we did right. And hey, these are some of the things that we haven't done yet that we probably need to be doing. So for the listeners that are later, okay, they're in my perspective and they're teenagers or they're college kids. What are the things that you suggest they do to get back and maybe pick up some of the things that they missed? I mean, I've taught a lot of these things, but I don't know the recipe, and I'd love to hear how value creation could be implemented in that capacity.
Yeah, you got it. first is changing how you think about it. And when you think about creating value, so we go to work, and every for-profit business, if they don't create value, enough of it, they go out of business, right? And a lot of them are creating just enough, and they're getting along, but they could create a lot more, right? In my first book, which is titled Your Most Important Number, talks about helping any organization of any type or size create value faster and align everybody to doing that. Now let's shift over to the family. And it's the same thing. What is your job for the family? How do you create value for the family? How do we strengthen that and create more and more value over time? And most parents don't think that way. Most kids don't think that way. And what I've learned in the organizational side, and I work with a lot of nonprofits, and I'm currently, I always have about 18 to 24 clients that I work with, leaders or senior leadership teams from organizations from as small as startups to $60 billion, which is the largest one I'm working with right now, market cap companies, and helping them get focused, create more and more value over time. What I've learned is that we need to create the environment within organizations from which everybody creates value, the rules of engagement. And what we're doing is we're cultivating everybody to create more and more value over time. It's not we give them this motivational nudge in a book or a class or tell them to do this or set a goal and it's all set it and forget it. No way. What are the rules of engagement that cultivate every single team member in an organization to create more value? Think the same way inside the family. And so what my co-author, Scott Donnell, and I put together, we call it the gravy stack method. There's 4 parts to it. Makes it really easy to operationalize it in the family. The first part is value creation. Second is house rules. Third is financial competency. And fourth is healthy struggle. So value creation, how do you talk about it? Talk about it holistically in the household. And the kids respond to it well. What is value creation? How do I think about it? And then house rules. There's 3 pieces to it. What's basically your job for the family, your role. And as you get older as a child, you pick up more and more responsibilities. You don't get paid for it. This is your job. This is what you do. Second is going to be expenses. And on the expenses side, as the children get older and older, they pick up more and more of their expenses. They're teenagers, are going out with friends. You cover all of that stuff, but you can pick it. There's even one parent that said kids are paying for dental visits if they have to fix a cavity because they didn't brush their teeth. I thought that was really innovative. And then the third piece of it is extra money. So how do we give an opportunity to make extra money so they can have money to learn to manage it and do all these kinds of things? So it's an amazing way to step them through their childhood all the way to adulthood to get better and better at all that stuff. And then financial competency, a lot of talk about financial literacy. Who cares if you understand what the terms mean? What I care about is that you can actually apply it. And I was financially independent, probably by the middle of my my junior year in high school. It was like no problem to live on my own. And I certainly did it my whole senior year. And then this last piece, healthy struggle. How do we think about it? It's like going to the life gym and you talked earlier about generational wealth being lost as you go through it. What do they say? It's like you earn it, you enjoy it, you destroy it is the last part. Well, we didn't walk family members through this boot camp to learn how to be stewards of this stuff. So this 4-part way of thinking about it, I'm following a lot of low and middle income families out here that are applying it actually across the country. And it's amazing how it's resonating. It's where, like, who cares how much you and I get it, Scott, and other people that think deeply about this? What I care about is, will the majority of people understand it? And it's resonating with low and middle income families. And that's the largest untapped bucket of value creation by far in this country, and I would say on the planet.
Well, you have to almost reframe their mindset. I've found that through a little bit more financial stability, even in my own family, I've had to stretch the comfort zones of my parents and help them see, we had a little bit of a scarcity mindset growing up, the way that, lower income families don't have enough. They wait for things to come to them sometimes. They do their job and they wait for someone to elevate them. And, having that abundant mindset alone shifts. So what you're doing for the children, in my opinion, when you talk about that, you're also doing for the parents. You're also helping them to see that it's okay to talk about these things. It's not private. There's no shame. What you're doing is providing for these children, and it's amazing. And they know you're imperfect. They're going to be so grateful when they're older. But the truth is, they don't all of a sudden understand it right now unless we give them some of those parameters. And And I think that's really powerful, but we're not just teaching the children, we're helping the parents to reframe their logic so that they can live outside of the box maybe they put themselves in when they first started producing.
Yeah, and here's I think a really powerful and interesting point that very few talk about. There's a lot of low income and even some middle income families that I know that have the scarcity mindset, and on the material value creation side, they're really limited in their thinking. However, they are way happier and more connected on the emotional energy and the spiritual side because they're in the struggle together, they're going through it. And I know a lot of folks that have a fair amount of money, doing pretty well, not to worry about it, could never probably spend the interest, and they're not nearly as happy. So when I think about holistic value creation, all of it's important in these low and middle income families. Okay, let's help you get a little bit more capable on the material value creation side. If you want to do more, maybe go on vacations, support the education of your children when they get there, whatever it is. But wow, I really admire how close and loving your family is in the emotional energy when I come over for a barbecue in the backyard. Like, this is so cool, and I feel so comfortable. Does that resonate?
Yeah, and when I was growing up at Catholic school, a lot of my friends, I was on financial aid, and I had friends that were their families were very successful. And, I remember one of my great friends as a kid, we had a pretty small house in a much, much different neighborhood, and he lived in this mansion with a pool, and it was like silver spoons. I mean, it was Ricky Schroeder next to the train going through the house. Like, to me, I never wanted to leave his house. I wanted to play video games. He didn't want to do anything that he had, nothing. And we would come to my house, and I remember getting mad at him one time. We were being like probably 8-year-old, 10-year-old kids, and be like, "Why do you want to be here?" And he was like, "I like being around your family. Everyone's home." Like, what I realized is we had all this freedom. We were at his house, but everybody was working. They were all gone. And my family, my dad was home at 4 o'clock. He was a blue collar worker. There's so many great things that came about because my dad was just home to be a part of, even if he was doing his own thing. It was just, there's so much value to that. Another thing that resonates to me that I think is really interesting is I've always said in my years of financial coaching that it's more difficult to say no when you have it than it is when you don't. So when my mom would look at me in a store and say, "Scott, we can't buy this. We can't get this. I can't get you these shoes." We started thinking in a different way. You talk about healthy struggle. I started thinking of ways I could get that. What would I do, Mom? What do I need? How much can you do? And how can I help you get there? Right. And growing up occasionally, with my children, it was a different feeling. Like, I would say no, and I was just saying no because I didn't want to spoil them. And so with the value creation model and Gravy Stack, you're providing parameters to parents to have the ability to say no and stand on something other than just a no. And that's what was resonating as you were talking about that.
Yeah, and doesn't matter how much you have, what are the right steps to get them fully ready to be value creating adults? There's a lot of stories that I could share, but my favorite one, since the book was launched, as a dad in Boston, has 2 young daughters, 11-year-old and a 7-year-old. And he texted me a couple months after the book came out, which came out again in April. And he said, "Hey, this is what my daughter told me today. Daddy, thank you for saving the dirty dishes to help me with my value creation work." I said, "Oh, that's really cool." And he was beside himself. And then he calls me in June and he says, "Hey, I need to tell you how value creation summer is going." It's like, "Well, I didn't use that term, value creation summer, in the book. What are you talking about?" And he goes, "It used to be both my daughters would argue over who had to do the work. Now they're arguing over who gets to do the work. And the little one is getting up intentionally earlier than the older one to walk the dog and do other things to get more value creation points. And now they're having those discussions. Hey, we're partners here. We need to divvy this up." And then the short third part of the story is the older one goes to middle school for the first time, and apparently in their process, they'll meet with a counselor. And then, so on day 1, meets with a counselor. Day 2, the counselor calls the dad and says, "Tell me everything you can about value creation summer. I'm going to use this language with all of my students, all the parents that I meet with. This is incredible." So The counselor never read the book, never talked to dad. It was just how excited and jazzed this little 11-year-old girl was talking to her about it. Now, isn't that amazing? So it goes back to what will resonate with kids. And another, really short story, something, closer to my older sister by a year and a half brings her 4 grandkids down that one of her daughters has. And we're in the backyard talking about, hey, what's your job for the family? And we're talking about value creation. And then they're running around the house, they're doing dishes, they're cleaning stuff up, asking how they can help. And she looked at me and said, they never talk to their mom that way. They never talk with me that way. Their rooms are a dump. And I said, well, it's language. So it really, really resonates. What is your value creation superpower? How would you like to create value in the world? What's your job for the family? What are you doing to strengthen it? This is really cool language. It's positive language. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's impactful. I mean, these are the things. Listen, what a lot of people don't understand is if you don't do this, Frederick Douglass said it's better to build strong boys than to repair broken men. And what happens is when you go back to repair them, it's very unfortunate. In my career, I have seen more than my fair share of children that started out as not having purpose because their parents paid for everything. So they failed at college. Their parents covered their apartments for years, and then they didn't take care of their health. So now their parents are covering their health bills. And it actually has gone so far on some of these cases as the children start to steal from their very parents, from their checkbook, from their CD accounts, like they will go into the bank and have something joint name and take it from their parents because they feel so entitled that it's theirs and it's going to be theirs. Their parents aren't using it. They've built the exact opposite model of value creation. They have created a value sucker on the world, somebody who's stealing from the very person that gave them life and loves them more than life itself. And what you're providing is a recipe so that doesn't happen, because kids, need discipline. They need accountability. They want to provide something bigger than themselves. They want to please you until they learn to actually do it for themselves, which is even more valuable. And it's really, really, it's such a great message. Something else that I want to just bring up, you wrote Your Most Important Number, and this is such an awesome book. And if I had you on the show and I didn't at least bring it up a little bit, I would be doing a disservice. But I felt like how the worlds kind of collided is you were talking about value creation. You were talking about employees and some of the things that are important. And in our company, one of the things that I found really valuable is a couple years ago, someone says, hey, Scott, you're out there teaching this high performance life. I'm using air quotes for our listeners, model, but how come we don't teach it inside of our company? Why are we doing it outside to everybody else, but we're not utilizing it in the company? So my COO said, I want to ditch all performance, all of the typical reviews that we do. And I want everything to be built around the who's, the what's, the why's, and the how. And I want it to be built and bridged between their personal life and their professional life, exactly what we're teaching. And I felt like as you were building this, you were looking at merging again, I feel like you're a stepping ladder. Like each book, each new business, each thing, you're pulling from the old world and developing. And that's just a theme in this conversation. But can you tell me, I know that's a lot of statements, but I'm interested in this question. How did the value creation kid, how was it influenced by your first book and the success of that book and what you're seeing every day when you're teaching that the most important number of these businesses?
Yeah, I never hear people talking about value creation holistically. They use a lot of, in business, they have business and leadership maxims and everybody's talking as high level. I view that now as business virtue signaling. And they just want to talk about that and sound smart. No, how do you actually apply it? Why did it work for you? Why didn't it work for you? Let's really dig into it. And ideally in organizations, we want to get everybody acting like the CEO of their own role. They're running a business within a business. They're the intrinsic motivation and the positive, productive engagement energy is just through the roof. I mean, that's ideally what we want. Most don't talk about it that way. And so we're getting at best 20% of the productive energy out of, most employees and most organizations. So I back all the way up, and it's like, wait a minute, why aren't we doing this with the kids? And the kids today are going to be running the world that I age out in. And again, I've talked to thousands of high school seniors about the virtues of entrepreneurship, and it's a 90-minute discussion because these groups are smaller that I meet with, 20 to 50 max. And we're talking, and I'll take the temperature of the room. What do you think about your opportunities going forward? And it's pretty darn low when I started. By the end, they say, wow, we can start anywhere and go everywhere. Yes, you absolutely can. And let's talk about what value creation means and all of it. And even though I'm a sci-fi buff, I love dystopian future movies. I just don't think I want to live in one. And if we don't fix the kids, we're going to be living in that. We're going to destroy all of this. And when I look at the United States, just as one example, and I bet you could do this rating for every country on the planet, I personally don't believe that we are unleashing any more than 10% of our value creation potential. And imagine if it was 50% or 80%. Oh my gosh, this would be so incredible. So my mission, and to kind of finish answering one of your questions you asked a while ago, why do this? Well, I want to convert and connect the culture in this country to value creation. And my co-author Scott Dahl and I, within the next 3 or 4 years, would love to have the gravy stack method in this value creation kid book being applied in over 1 million families. So imagine that. That would move the needle, because this will become infectious to everyone else around them in a really good way. And I divide the world up into people in 2 simple categories. I'm always trying to just, how do we make the language really clear and how it makes sense? So I see value creators and I see game riggers. And game riggers are at all scale, like a sort of lower level common criminal. They rig the game by stealing to skim off the top of what the value creators are creating. At scale, it's happening with a lot of global leaders where trillions of dollars are changing hands because they're rigging the game. They're not committed to creating better conditions to work, live, learn, and play for the citizenry. They're committed to fixing the game or rigging the game in their favor. So we call that cronyism or crony capitalism, and most people don't even know what that means. But they do understand. People that create real value know when it's right, and it's win-win. It's not win-lose. I got mine, you lost. Haha, that's not real value. And they know what game rigging looks like. And so I want to increase the ratio to have a lot more value creators and way fewer game riggers, and write legislation and pass laws that make it really difficult for those at the top to do what they're doing today.
Well, if everybody's focused on value creation, it means they're not focused on themselves. It also means that they're connecting with other humans. And this is the biggest problem I think we see in the country, in the world right now, is that there's a lack of connection. Each year, there's less and less true connectivity between even just great conversations like this, but having the ability to get out and connect with people. And when you're creating value for other humans, you're having a bigger purpose, a bigger impact, and you're working for something outside of yourself. It's not just about you. Yes, you feel good, but the key is it's inevitable that good things are going to happen. And I love the fact that it could actually implement it all the way up to legislation, because we do know that there's a lot of game riggers out there. And I agree with that. That is, I too don't want to live in that crazy sci-fi world that often gets pushed out there on sci-fi movies.
Yeah. And I believe you and I are fully aligned, and I articulate it a little bit differently. I believe that everybody does what's in their own best self-interest, whether it's for this life or the next. I think everybody does. So by definition, everyone is selfish, but are you win-win selfish, or are you win-lose? And most people play in a spectrum and kind of move around. And as I cultivate myself to being a better value creator and elevating my human consciousness, whatever that is, just figure more stuff out, right? I want to keep moving towards more win-win. And so that's how I think about it. And when I do things and people say, oh, that was so selfless of you and you're so altruistic, as well, I don't believe that's such a thing. It doesn't exist. Selfishly, I feel better. So yay, I did that. I do all of this stuff. I don't get a direct reward out of it a lot of times, but it exposes me to other opportunities where I can choose to play or not play. And I've created more emotional energy out there. I've brought more communities together. So I've got the emotional part, the spiritual side, and I can play in different financial places. But I look at altruism, selflessness, selfishness, the way people think about them today and talk about them today, and it's like they don't exist that way. That's how. Does that resonate, Scott?
Yeah, I understand I understand exactly what you're saying, and I think it's really important. The way the message is communicated is going to touch different people different ways. And so what I love is that all of our brains work a little bit differently. So the way that you say it and the way that we say it might sound different, but we're saying the same thing. Giving is selfish. And the reality is it feels pretty good when you do these types of things, and it makes the world a better place. So it becomes win-win. And I don't see any problem with any of those things. I think it's a great way, and you're making a great imprint on the world, an impact on the world of creating stronger children so that they can be stronger men and women into the future. And, that seems like a pretty honest, great way to go at the world, and not just focus on the money or the next business and this book isn't just a calling card. This book is more than a calling card. It's a mission. And I think that's something that's special.
Yeah, 100%. And maybe the biggest selfish reason for me to be doing all of this is the more value creators in the world, the better the world is for myself, my family, my friends and communities to interact with. And this whole concept of virtue, and there's a big difference between actual virtue and its application and virtue signaling, right? And I was with a group the other day, and this guy said, yeah, there was another couple of us that were meeting and talking about how much money is enough. And if somebody has 100 billion and I said it was 200 billion, they're going back and forth. He said, well, who are you to tell anybody how much is too much? And when you start talking about what you would do it over what they're doing, to me, that's just virtue signaling. Like, really? You never created that much value, so you're not in a position where, but you would be better. And I said, but I do think it's okay to be judgmental if they're practicing and applying wealth and power without virtue. We can call them out on that. But with virtue, those two things, wealth and power, they create value in the world at scale. Without virtue, they take value out of the world at scale. So that's I think a healthier way to think about where that goes. And unfortunately, I think there's a lot more folks in the world that are more of a virtue signaler than they are actually practicing virtue. And for me, practicing virtue is intentionally doing things that will measurably create more value in the world. And at the same time, I have to be intentionally doing things to push back on things that take value out of the world. And I would love it if more of us thought about it that way. And I don't care if it's one-on-one or it's at scale, but if more of us did that, that will move the needle and create a lot lower chance of a dystopian future that you and I don't have to live in.
Yeah, well, I like where your head's at, and I am rooting for you, the mission, and this book. Lee, you're a musician. You love music. What do you love to listen to? What's on the playlist and on a regular basis? And do you play what you listen to? So are they correlated?
Yeah, I like to play a lot more than listen. I've always been that way. And for me, music is about emotional energy, value creation, and what you're conveying out there. And, think about the songs, could be Beatles, pick the band, but songs out there that elevate over 1 billion people when they listen to it on the planet, with their, their positive emotional energy. So I love to play. I still play a minimum of about 2 hours every single day. And I have a few different bands that I'll play with. I've got a couple of gentlemen that, we're starting to write songs right now for another original project, and that's fun. I'm sitting in my recording studio right now. So I have a really full life. I get to do what I want to do. And my mission and my whole purpose for being here is to promote this whole concept of value creation. My current company, ETW, and you can learn about that at etw.com. But our mission is connecting culture to value creation, and we're doing it in organizations of any type or size. I even just had a couple of states reach out to me about helping them implement this in their states. How cool is that? We work with a lot of nonprofits, a lot of for-profit companies, but this is resonating, this holistic value creation, even with government. So yeah, music's amazing. It's been a power hobby since I was, 5, 6 years old.
Is there is there something that you play more often, a band that you cover more often than not when you play?
I would prefer to play originals, but when I do events, I like music that's timeless. So my library is pretty eclectic. If it sounds good and it's timeless and it resonates with me, I go for it. And there's some country that's amazing. There's some speed metal that's amazing. There's Bach, amazing. There's so
Yeah,
many amazing things out there.
that's great. Yeah, so it's interesting. You mentioned what music can do, and I think sometimes in life we think that these musicians may be the only one that can touch future generations at that kind of level. I mean, I can listen to Let It Be and get chills every time I hear it, knowing the song, knowing the background, knowing the references. Like the music is something my mom explained to me when we were growing up, and the words, and I love every aspect of the Beatles, right? And how I feel is a positive emotional state when I listen to that, or many, many other things. That's been a form of meditation for me for many, many years. But the things that you're doing with Value Creation Kid, with the things that you're trying to create, individuals, if you create enough value, can have the same kind of positive emotional state for people for many, many generations. And that's really what this message is. It's much bigger than right now. It's something that you're trying to, in my opinion, change the trajectory of what the past generations maybe have not done as great, but we're trying to give them a better playbook or blueprint. And you've taken the blueprint you did in business and you've applied it operationally to families. And I really commend you for that. I love the message. I love, as a 21-year veteran in the financial services industry, I would love to see some of these families come into our company's business and talk to them into the future and say, wow, this is what you did. This is how you implemented it. That is so cool. So, tell everybody one more time where to find you so they can, I want to make sure they can get a copy of the book. I want to make sure that they can find you again. Just give the website of what, to connect with you. And then you also do keynotes and other things as well to make sure people can bring you in for the messaging.
Yeah, absolutely. Just go to my website, which is etw.com. That stands for Execute to Win. And it's all about holistic value creation. And both books, Value Creation Kit as well as Your Most Important Number, you can find them in 40,000 different channels out there. And there's an audiobook for both. Both books, the first one I narrate, Your Most Important Number, Scott Donald narrates Value Creation Kit. But we both do interviews after each chapter in Value Creation Kit, and I do 30-minute interviews after each chapter in Your Most Important Number. And at the very end of Your Most Important Number, I narrated it in 2 days, including interviews. I did an impromptu 3-minute guitar solo and stuck it at the end of the audiobook.
Nice.
And it's being received well. I get notes from all over the world about how it's changing organizations and how they create value. I just got a request from Poland to translate it into Polish because there's so much interest over there where leaders want to give it to all of their employees. So it's been a fun ride. I'm doing this because I really want to. I don't need it for living expenses. I really want this value creation message going into the world, and let's make value creation cool again.
That's awesome. Yeah, people love to learn. People love to learn. People love to grow. But they really love to learn and grow from great humans. So when you share a little bit of the guitar riff and you show a little bit of yourself on something, we feel so much more connected when we're reading it. And that means that you're pouring all of yourself into the work. And when you do that, you're creating the value that you're talking about and teaching to everybody else. So Lee Benson, thank you so much for being on the show today. Thanks for being a part of the High Performance Life. And thanks for allowing our listeners to hear from somebody who's not only teaching this, but has done this on so many levels. It's been an honor to interview you today.
Thanks for having me, Scott. I've enjoyed this.
I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you liked it, there's more where this one came from. Click here and enjoy some more.